Okay, thank you. All right, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks Martha for the introduction. Again, I'm sorry if I haven't met you all. I've been remote for the last 3 years, but I'm excited to meet everyone today. My name is Alex. I'm a postdoc at California Policy Lab here, and I'm excited to share my research on the long-term impacts of mentors, evidence from experimental and administrative data. It's joint work with Neviana Petkova from the US Treasury, and the usual disclaimer applies that these are our views and not those of the Treasury. Okay. So the motivation for thinking of mentors today is there's been mounting evidence that disparities that kids experience in childhood, everywhere from their parents to their schools to their teachers in terms of their environment, tend to have long-lasting socioeconomic gaps in adulthood. Today, I want to isolate and unpack one specific channel by which environments might matter, and that's the role of mentors in shaping kids' labor market identities. This is very closely tied to my prior work on labor supply and innovation, the so-called Lost Einstein's line of research, where we were finding that kids who grew up around inventors are much more likely to become inventors later in life, which was sort of a smoking gun for us to think about this mentoring or role model effect. And I really wanted to zoom in on that today. There's also been a lot more recent work on natural mentors, as well as some very exciting work coming out of Germany recently, some of it's still forthcoming, on some of the shorter term impacts of mentors. But today we're going to be able to look longer term all the way up to income. The question that I want to ask today is, can artificially created mentors confer the same hypothesized long-run effects that we think seem to be accruing to privileged youth who are growing up around their more privileged parents, around better teachers, better neighborhoods? And I want to answer the question by linking a 30-year-old RCT microdata set, as well as program administrative data to US tax records. I'm going to find that youth who gained access to mentors are going to not only exhibit short-run improvements in their behaviors, but also long-run and lasting social and economic gains into their early 30s. And I'm going to put all of this in terms of a model of identity formation, which is going to help us interpret the results. And it's the mechanism that you'll see is best supported by both the program design and the survey evidence from the RCT. So the outline for the rest of the talk, I want to tell you a little bit more about the RCT, how it was run, and the program. I want to then dive into the short-run outcome reanalysis and see that there is some evidence that kids are doing better in the 18-month span of the RCT. I then want to move on and spend more time on those long-run outcomes in the tax data. We're going to find the most significant outcomes in terms of behavioral effects, whether they go to college, marriage, teen birth, things like that. We won't find significant effects there on economic outcomes. I probably won't go into heterogeneity on the RCT today, but I can talk about it. And then to build on the RCT design, which is imprecise, I'll introduce another observational research design, which is going to be an auxiliary program and administrative data set that'll allow us to replicate the strong behavioral results from the RCT and also gain significance in the economic outcomes. I'll relate the magnitudes that we're studying across all these outcomes through a model of identity formation and intergenerational mobility. And then finally, at the end, since this is my first time talking at CCPR, I'd like to also give an overview of my broader research agenda, and a lot of that includes research that's going on at CPL, which many of you might know of also. And I'll also say, I don't know what the norm is, but I'm happy to take questions during the seminar or after.
The norm is determined by the speaker.
Okay, so questions as they come. So in order to get variation in mentors, the way that I want you to think about the treatment pill, in some sense that I'm looking at here, it's taking a pool of youth from primarily low income and racially marginalized backgrounds, and it's going to give half of them the chance to interact with a well-off mentor. And importantly, it's not going to include any financial transfers or tutoring. It's a purely social intervention. That being said, in the realm of social interventions, you might imagine, it's probably a fairly weak touch intervention. It's much less time exposed to this person than changing one's parents, changing one's teachers, but still it's a clean starting place to start thinking about isolating mentors individually. The program that I'm studying is called Big Brothers Big Sisters. So they enroll volunteer mentors who are typically young professionals, and there's an intense screening process. When I gave this talk earlier this year at UCLA Econ, there was demand for a little bit of descriptive statistics on the mentor, so I want to follow up on that. This is from a data set where they skew male. The age at inquiry, you should think they're about 28-year-olds when they were coming to the program. Their income is almost $90,000 in the family household income. The individual W-2 income is about $80,000. So these are pretty well-off people. And the distribution of races. So most of the volunteers, a little bit more than 60% of the volunteers are going to be white or Caucasian in this data set. And then for the youth, there's going to be a lot more racially marginalized background.
Hey, sorry, on the previous slide, I was looking at the numbers while you were speaking, but
Okay.
the male was put in 0 1s for the mentors for not coming in.
Yeah, I will get into this soon, but this is from a data set that's mostly Big Brother. So the RCT is from both Big Brothers and Big Sisters. This one is skewing male. I probably should have taken that off. Yeah.
Is this the same?
It's a similar time period. It's a similar time period. I'll get into the differences later, but it's a similar time period. Thank you. So the matches are same sex during the time period we study. They'll be based on interests and preferences. Unfortunately, they're not made randomly, although I would love it if they were. Yeah, so like what kind of sports you like doing or active hobbies, and then also you can have a preference for same religion or not same religion, and same race or not same race. I think they find that matching on activities that you like to do is very important for at least getting the match off the ground, but may not necessarily matter so much later.
They ask screening questions of both sides.
There are screening
To
questions of
determine?
both sides. I think there's like an actual background check I think that's only for the mentors, but there would be a home visit for the youth and an interview with both the youth and the parent or guardian. The way the program works, both sides are asked to commit to at least 1 year. In terms of number of hours, you could think of it as maybe 200 to 300 hours over the course of something like 2 or 3 years. They're asked to meet about 4 hours per week, at least to start. This will come into play when we talk about cost drivers of the program, but there's significant involvement of match support caseworker, someone who's there to make sure that the relationship is proceeding, both safely and on a good track. So that's the main cost driver because the mentors are not paid. The activities that people are doing during the match, you want to think of these as social, cultural activities, often outdoors. It could be like riding a bike, or it could be going bowling or in a restaurant. In relation to other literature on sort of childhood interventions, this is not a tutoring intervention. This is not a cash transfer. This is a purely social intervention. And I think that's useful in interpreting the results later. Yeah.
So you say it's social, but it's not prohibited to provide support if you want to. So I'm thinking like long-term relationship. If I see this person for 2 years, they might send me the resume. I might give some advice. I mean,
that's not prohibited. Yeah. So the financial side, I thought you were going to ask about financial. That's
same for financial. We can help at some point in the life.
So that would be an issue that the caseworker would probably get involved in if there were actually financial transfers going on, and that's not really advised, and that would be like on a case-by-case basis. In terms of, I think it comes up in particular when you think about college. It's totally possible that the mentors may be saying something about college that's sort of transmitting some information. I don't know where you want to draw the line between sort of what's social and what's information. Yeah.
Not be limited to social, over
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. But I do want to just sort of make note, it's not a tutoring intervention or financial intervention, which rules out a lot of other interventions I think that people are studying. The design, so it was run in 1991 across 8 cities. They were designed to be nationally representative. It was published in the 90s also in the Journal of Evaluation Review by Gene Baldwin Grossman and Joe Tierney. About half the subjects in the study are identifying as what was defined there as racial minority. About 2/3 of them are boys. The treatment control dilution is important to understand also. So the treatment is randomizing the youth to be eligible to be matched with a mentor as soon as they inquire. Now, because there's an undersupply of mentors, not all the youth ended up getting matched within the 18-month study frame. Only about 3/4 of them got matched, and it's particularly lower for boys because there are less male mentors. And then similarly, the control group, because it was thought unethical to deny them a mentor for life, they were just randomized to an 18-month wait list. So that's not such an issue when we think about the short run outcomes after 18 months, but we're going to want to keep that in mind when we go on to look at outcomes later in life, that in principle, all of them were eligible from the control group to be matched. Anecdotally, from talking to the original PIs, and there's been a little bit of survey evidence since then, for better or for worse, it sounds like not much of the control group ever did get matched. So that's sort of going to work in our favor. But still, for these reasons of treatment control dilution, we're going to be thinking in terms of intention to treat estimates, which is likely to be a lower bound. for the effect of the treatment on the treated. The data that I'm using is coming from 3 sources. So the mentoring data comes from, so first the RCT microdata contains self-reported outcomes at baseline and after 18 months for those roughly 1,000 youth. And then I have partnered with the Boston affiliate, pardon me, to get a much bigger data set of about 4,000 youth applicants and their mentors, because the mentors were not involved in the original study. So I'll use this for building up a more precise design to supplement the RCT findings. And as I sort of prefaced earlier, it's primarily for boys and it's slightly younger cohorts, which we can talk about later in the Boston data. And then both of these data sets I'll be linking to the universe of US tax records, leveraging the IRS SOI data bank, which has been used in many papers now. This will allow me to follow up kids' outcomes until their early 30s and avoid the need to rely on self-reports. Yeah. So I want to dive into now some short run questions. First, I want to ask, when we look at the data, is there any evidence that the treatment had an effect in the short run? If you go back and look at the original study that was published in the 1990s, they analyzed a lot of outcomes. Well, they reported a lot of outcomes. They collected even more outcomes. Most of the outcomes that they reported were not significant in the paper. The few that were significant were quite borderline. It's the type of paper that if you look at it today, you sort of wonder, you know, is anything really going on there? So the first question I want to touch on is reanalyzing that original RCT data with a more consistent framework for multiple hypothesis testing. For this, I'm going to focus on a set of 21 questions where they asked in sequence, did you hit someone? Did you skip school? Did you do all these things? And that's going to give me sort of a way to understand, is behavior changing writ large? So here I'm showing you 21 ITTs. I know the screen's a little bit fuzzy, but hopefully you can read enough. I think you can't see the colors too well, but the first bar, so did you visit a museum? It's positive and it's green. So it's green means that it's significant at the 5% level. I've re-signed all these so that the 1 is the positive direction. It means that you're giving the good answer. So lying to your parent is also going in the positive direction. That means the kids are less likely to have lied to their parents in the treatment group or to say they lied to their parents, but that's not significant. You know, we can go through all 21 questions, but you'll find nearly all of these are going in the right direction, except, you know, that one at the bottom. Only 3 out of 21 are significant. Is that more than you would expect by chance? The answer is maybe a little, but it's not too much more than you'd expect by chance. So the first question I wanted to know, is this a null result, or is there actually a behavioral improvement happening here? And it's just really tricky to measure behavior, and we sort of have 21 noisy measures of behavior. So to do that, I'm going to introduce 3 multiple hypothesis tests, and I'll use the same tests throughout the study. Yes. Yep.
These things could be activities they did.
Absolutely, yeah. So they've almost cooked it in their favor, right? What am I going to cook it in their favor? Well, so far I don't feel like I don't make a lot of this, to be honest. I mean, there's the significance issue. There's also, you know, the issue of social desirability bias. You know, when the kid gets randomized to the control group, might they say something that is not, you know, as nice, even if the treatment didn't have. But I know, Martha, we've talked about this, that even if they know how to answer better, maybe that is a good treatment effect. So I'll put all those caveats out there. I'm gonna sort of find that there's more evidence than I thought in the short run, and it's going to be a springboard to launch into the long run.
It's really good that they stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
That's how I think the process.
Yeah, I will show you alternative. We'll be building indexes, and we can do alternative ways to build that. I'll start with the equal weights, and then we'll do something that sort of predicts college and stuff like that. Also,
an alternative question. I think you said before that you're going to look at these 21 outcomes. Why did you choose these 21? Are these the ones that they pre-specified or that they thought were important, or it's just
no? There are 5 hypotheses pre-specified in like internal documents, not anywhere public. Those 5 hypotheses basically span these outcomes.
Okay.
So one of the main buckets was sort of like relationship with parents, and I think lying to your parents is one measure of that. You know, so these map slightly to the number of hypotheses, but there's not a perfect concordance.
Let me ask it. Are there 50 outcomes could have chosen and you chose the 21 because they did, or like what? How did
No,
these 21?
there's way
come
more
to
than
be?
50 outcomes.
Oh.
So what you're not seeing here is all these sort of like Likert scales. So there's measures of socio-emotional
Okay,
things that we don't really find to be hard behaviors
Okay,
in
okay.
economics that we wouldn't really know what to make of. These are the most objective questions.
so you were trying to find things that are actual, I see.
Yeah, I was trying to find the sort of hard outcomes relative to the soft outcomes. I would also say, I mean, it happens to be pretty representative, I think, of the hypotheses that they had going out. Yeah.
I think just to echo your question, do you remove those that are perhaps mechanically? I mean, I see like museum, which is like strongly like one of the few being significant. I see like visiting a campus. I mean, there are not that many stuff to do in Boston, and I guess visiting MIT would be the thing.
No, I completely agree. I completely agree. No, I mean, they ought to be doing some of these things with the mentors.
Yeah.
I think, they probably had a hypothesis going in that they would get 21 like huge significant effects. And that's, but it's not the case.
Yeah.
So it's
In
surprising.
many cases, I would remove.
Yeah. Look, yeah, I take your point. First, I want to think about how to deal with the multitude of outcomes. So the first way that I'll deal with this is a permutation test. So we notice 20 out of 21 outcomes going in the right direction. How sort of rare of an outcome is that? So what I can do is permute the treatment variable 10,000 times in the data and check in how many cases do we get as many outcomes going in the right direction. That's a way to use the data to rule in on this. And the p-value is quite low on that. It's a pretty rare event to have all these going in the right direction. So the indexes, so this is similar to what's been used in the MTO literature. I'll show you, this is an index of behavior where I put equal weights on just to start. And you see kind of an upward shift in the behavioral index of the treatment group. And that's significant using the KS test for distributions. Moving to a regression format, we see a significant difference at the mean in the outcomes behavior index. It's even more significant if you control for behaviors at baseline. Baseline behaviors reassuringly are not different by treatment and control. You can use maybe a better index, which is the one that sort of predicts college going. If you think, some of these are more important than others, we find something significant there. Also, you can just use a PCA analysis. This is the first principal component, and you find something relatively significant there. You can't interpret the sign. So I'm going to say that gives relatively strong evidence from the index test. And then the last one, or depending how you like to view it, it could be the first one, Martha, is the joint F test. So asking, do all the outcomes jointly predict treatment? This is something people often do in an RCT to look at balance. And this is a test that we don't get a significant result on. We can't reject the null on that, but I think in this case, it happens to be a stronger test because it's not making use of the signs of the directions. So I'm not looking to sort of plant my flag in this, but I would say that despite, how many outcomes were collected in the original RCT, I think there's pretty good evidence that the kids at least answered better. And, we talked about there could be social desirability bias. This might not necessarily translate into long run outcomes. So I want to spend the rest of the talk really diving into whether these promising initial results are translating into social and economic improvements in adulthood. So getting into the long run outcomes that we observe in the IRS, first I'm going to tell you about the behavioral outcomes and then the more classic economic outcomes. So we observe some form of college attendance from a tax form that colleges file on behalf of tuition paying students called the 1098T. About a third of the youth in the sample have been to colleges during the normal age, and about half of them have been to college ever. We have a noisy measure of incarceration. It's really only from federal and state prisons. And it also only starts around age 30, which is not sort of the best age, but this is what we have available to us. Still, there is about 10% of boys in the sample are hitting that measure of incarceration, though it's a little bit spotty. We see marriage and divorce filings from taxes. 40% have been married, about half of them have been divorced, which roughly mirrors national statistics. We see teen birth from claiming independent, born before your 20th birthday. And then finally, we'll see mortality. About 2% of women and 4% of men have died during the past 30 years. I'll use the same approach to multiple hypothesis testing. So the joint F test, the number going in the right direction, and the index test. In this case, I'll define the index as equally weighted, +1 if you went to college or got married, and then it's going to be subtracting if you got divorced, got teen birth, prison, or mortality. We can play with other ways to design the index. I think you'll see it's going to be pretty robust. So looking now at the long run behavioral changes, I want to focus first on the index before diving into the components. So we see a positive coefficient on the index. I want to hold off on interpreting it, but that it's positive and it's highly significant, which suggests that something is going on with some components, at least, of the outcomes. Moving to the individual outcomes, we see about a 10% percentage points increase in college attendance. Off a base of about 50%, that's about a 20% increase in college going for youth who are randomly assigned to get a mentor relative to the control group. We see a positive but borderline significant effect on marriage. Divorce is going in the right direction, but insignificant. Teen birth, again, in the right direction, but insignificant or borderline significant. I will say this is among both boys and girls. If we subset to only girls, we have about twice the coefficient, but similar standard errors. And then, with the deceased rate, incarceration, we see some right direction, but not a lot of significance. At least sentence length seems to be lower if at the 10% level. I don't want to make too much of the individual outcomes, but I do want to go through that. The likelihood of getting 7 of these going in the right direction, if there was no difference in treatment and control, is very unlikely if you do the permutation test. And then finally, the F test from the regression of the treatment on all the outcomes is telling us that there is something different about the outcomes in this data set. So there's relatively robust evidence here that, there's relatively robust evidence that behavior is improving in the long run. I want to turn now, yeah, come on.
Just a small point on
Yeah.
divorce. I mean, for me, maybe that's the least intuitive outcome, but it's also selected, right? Because it's divorce given that you're married and you have
For
an
sure.
effect
Yeah.
on being married. So
It's selected, yeah. Yeah, it's not obvious how to do it. So I think that I do have a version somewhere that uses divorce for everyone. I'm willing to bet it's not significant either.
no, or just remove divorce from the index.
Yeah. I think in the index, I code divorce as 0 if you're not married. Moving on now to the outcomes of economic self-sufficiency. So we're primarily going to look at wages and log wages. We're seeing that off W-2s. I'm going to average over 5 years of precision, 5 years of their life for precision. Still at the sort of late 20s, we're going to see relatively low incomes in the ballpark of $15,000 per year. Given the income range, it's also, we thought it would be interesting to have an indicator for whether they're above the federal poverty line, which is about $12,000 at this year. About half of them are above the federal poverty line. I'll also code related variable, which is the share of years that you're not employed. So on average, they're spending about a quarter of those years unemployed. We have some measures of benefits receipt, certainly from the tax data. We'll see unemployment benefits. We'll see Social Security benefits if they're taxable, which is basically just supplemental security income. And we see EITC, of course. There's a very high take up of EITC in this group. Almost 90% of women in the group are taking it up. For the index, I think it's a little bit less clear how to sign all of these. And I'm gonna tell you what's robust and what's not. But I'm gonna say it's +1 if you're above the federal poverty line, and then you're gonna get dinged if you're not employed, getting Social Security benefits or UI benefits. Of course, to get UI benefits, you have to have worked, so it's not necessarily a bad thing. That's how I'm gonna just build an index. Yeah.
What about, what share of these folks between 25 and 30 were enrolled in school?
So,
In graduate school?
well, we're not able to see, I think, graduate versus undergraduate school. I would be willing to bet that it's pretty low for graduate school.
But no wages they could potentially meet in that group.
Right. So I will tell you, I've experimented with a lot of robustness to, there's this question, are people not employed because they're in college? And I don't think that's the answer. So I've built sort of a variable that, are you employed or are you in college? Like either or. That's not gonna matter. Yeah. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but yeah.
Yeah, how about, it's also on the non-employed.
Yeah.
So mothers of young kids, I mean, what does it look like for men versus women?
For employment rates for men versus women, I don't know the answer actually. I have income, but not employed. The income is including zeros, so that's telling you a little something, but I don't actually know the unemployment rates or non-employment rates for men versus women. I'd have to look back.
I mean, it has a different meaning for a man.
For
who's
sure.
unemployed than-
For sure, yeah. So I'll have to look into it. Okay, not a lot of stars on this page, so that's why a lot of the results aren't going to matter to how you want to define the index. But given this definition of the index, we can see so it's a negative sign, so they're doing worse on the index. It's not significant by any stretch of the imagination. Turning to the components of the index, and again, I don't want to read into the components when the index itself isn't significant. But we see, if anything, there's a decline in wage for the treatment group as well as for log wages. We see they're spending more years non-employed. The only star on the whole slide is that they're less likely to get UI benefits. And as we discussed earlier, it's not really clear whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, because it means that they had to have worked to have been laid off. Given the number of hypotheses tested here, I'm not that tempted to read it that much into that single star. But I want to look at sort of, as a whole, can we say that the treatment is either improving outcomes or even making outcomes worse? So we can test either of these hypotheses, whether the outcomes are either improving across the board or worse across the board. And you can't get any traction to reject either of them. What's going on here is these outcomes are just way too correlated. Your wages, your log wages, your employment, these are all sort of picking up the same signal. F test from the regression of the treatment on outcomes, again, can't say anything. What I want you to take away, though, is the confidence don't rule out what I would call economically large benefits. So the confidence interval for wages is saying that it could have hurt them by as much as 28%, but it also could have helped them by as much as 17%. So it's really just too imprecise in the small RCT sample to say more. Yeah.
But still, I mean, your sample is large enough to have large effect on college attendance, right? So does it suggest that for this population, there is no college premium or?
No, that's not what it suggests. So the way that I would think about it is there's a lot that's determining people's wages, like what school you went to, things like that, your family background, that's not being varied by the treatment. So there's a lot more variance in wages that's not being accounted for by the treatment here, whereas college, there actually is a substantial portion of the variance in college going that's being accounted for by the treatment. So I think
Control for some characteristics you have?
in the RCT, I'll do that in the observational design. So I don't use any controls in the RCT. I've tried some controls, they don't improve precision. I will tell you, and I think that this might also sort of be part of where you're going with the question. Presumably there's returns to education, and we know that they're 10 percentage points more likely to go to college, and maybe there's some small increases on marriage and teen birth would have increases in income also. So if we just look at the way that those behavioral outcomes cross-sectionally predict income, from the behavioral increases, you would only expect to see a 9% increase in wages. So it is way too big of a confidence interval to rule out even something like the return to education.
So that this population is going to specific countries that have lower returns.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have the data. Could be, there. I mean, you said they're largely underprivileged.
I hear that.
So there is evidence that the curriculum is decreasing.
Yeah.
To composition.
I totally hear that.
You
I think I have might be an appendix in the paper, a figure of what colleges they're going to. They're not going to Ivy League colleges for sure. A lot of it is, sort of like career vocational education. It does bring up questions about the returns to education. My sense is that's not probably what's going on here. My sense is it's probably just too noisy, because I think not being able to rule out an 18% increase in income is sort of well above what you would expect to see from standard returns to education. And that's why we're going to move into the observational design. And I think you'll find it a little bit more satisfying, hopefully. But I know it's frustrating to sort of leave it at an insignificant point. Moving on to the long run observational study. This is going to use data from about 4,000 applicants to the Boston chapter of Big Brothers Big Sisters. They applied between 1991 and 2010. So I mentioned a little, they're a bit of a younger sample, just based on when their database started. And it's also about 90% male. This is for historical reasons I don't want to really get into, but Big Brothers and Big Sisters merged a while back in one city. Big Sisters held out. So there's Big Brothers Big Sisters of Boston and Big Sisters. So that's why it skews male for Big Brothers Big Sisters. The outcomes are going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be able to observe college at 20, which is sort of the normal college going age. I have to lower the age at which I'm measuring income to be in the 20 to 25. I'm not going to say much about it in the talk, but also another advantage of the Boston data is we have data on the match length, and that's going to allow us to explore in the paper how heterogeneous outcomes are by how long the match lasted. It's not randomized, but it isn't intuitively sort of going in the right direction that we see that kids who are matched longer have better outcomes, whether it's college attendance or income. So in building up this research design for the observational data, I work closely with match support caseworkers and agency staff. To understand the pipeline through which the youth are going, they're starting at the initial inquiry stage. They make it through an interview. From the interview, most people become what's called ready to be matched, which means they have all the info on you from the interview. But then only 75% of those people go on to be matched. And the real question is what's causing some people to be matched and others to apply and not get matched. So when you talk to caseworkers, what they really harp on is location. They know it's very hard to match youth who don't live near a subway or who don't live near where the mentors live. There was a sort of a public op-ed piece that the CEO of the Boston chapter put out sort of about a call for mentors who want to go into Dorchester, which is sort of one of the harder neighborhoods in Boston. There are, of course, a big supply of mentors in so sort of Cambridge area and a big demand for mentors in Dorchester, and there's a big imbalance. So secondary factors do exist, but they're not going to paint a clear pattern. So if you look at the service manual, what they'll tell you is they don't want to enroll the people who are doing so well that they don't need services. So it could sort of point to some negative selection of those who are matched. On the other hand, in the data, we also see a higher match rate in single parent households. So that's the negative selection also. But also you can see a lower rate of youth with severe behavioral problems. I'll just show you in the table. So I added a match versus unmatched comparisons. So the matched youth are way more likely to be in a subway. So that's the location showing up. Matched youth are also much more likely to not have a father present. And then they're more likely, and by some measures, they're more likely to have a severe behavioral problem. So that's the sort of two directions of selection that you might think. Other than that, they are going to be on average a little bit younger. That's essentially mechanical because if you apply at a younger age, you have a higher chance of getting matched at some point before you age out of the program. So for that reason, we'll definitely control for birth year and age at application. So here I'm going to build up that observational research design first with college because we know what the RCT estimate is for college going from the national program. The RCT estimate was about 10 percentage points. I didn't get into heterogeneity. It's a little bit bigger for boys though. It's 14 percentage points for boys. So you might look to see something in the 10 to 14 percentage point range from the Boston data. Just a simple match versus unmatched comparison to start with. It's telling you those that apply and get matched to mentor are about 9% more likely to go to college than those youth that applied and did not get matched. I'm going to progressively add in controls. So here I'm including parent income, also, the birth year and when they applied. It's not doing much to change the coefficient. It falls slightly, but the R squared increases substantially. I'm adding now controls for geography. So I'm comparing youth who applied from the same census tract. One youth gets matched, the other youth doesn't get matched. We have a relatively stable coefficient. The R squared is really rising. I can do it with more progressively fine-grained geographies going all the way over to block. We lose precision at the block level just because there aren't a whole lot of cases where two youths are actually applying from the same block, but the coefficient is very stable. And we also add in agency controls for those behaviors, those interests. And we have a relatively robust, stable coefficient. I formalized in the paper with a ton of corrections and bounds following Oster 2019 and Alder-Tabor. And based on this, you would find a lower bound for any point estimate if selection on unobservables mirrors the selection on observables of about 5%. So we're finding evidence for college going among the observational sample that's really quite similar to what we found in the RCT sample. I'm going to settle on the highlighted spec here as my sort of preferred spec for the observational analysis, where we're controlling for parent income, year of birth, application year, and census tract. The reason I'm going at the census tract level, which people sort of think of as a neighborhood level is it's going to allow us to have a little bit more precision in terms of the match pool. We're getting a bigger match pool of people who are lying within the same neighborhood. So here's the matched versus unmatched comparison using that research design that I highlighted when we look at college at age 20 among the youth. So it's about 7% is what we're settling on. It's a little bit smaller, if anything, than what we found in the RCT, which is a little surprising because we would have expected maybe this would be bigger because the RCT is an ITT effect. We're finding the smaller, so it might be that there's still some residual selection, or it might be that the point estimate is just smaller in the sample. If we move to income, we see either using individual income or family income on the order of a 15 to 20 percentage point increase in these kids' income at age 20 to 25. So pretty substantial and significant increases in income from the observational design. We're able to get a lot more precision than we could in the RCT. You might want to ask now, given these two different estimates, what do we make of these very different point estimates? The observational data is now telling us wages are increasing by almost 20%. The RCT, on the other hand, was suggesting that if anything, wages were falling by perhaps 5%, was the point estimate. So what we do in the paper, there's a formula to minimize the mean squared error of the forecast bias using a precision weighted mean. So intuitively, we're gonna combine the 2 point estimates for the different outcomes, and we'll do that in a way that relates them to the variance of the outcome and the standard error. It's going to be assuming that these are 2 noisy but independent and unbiased estimates of the same parameter. There are different ways to do this. I want to highlight it. So Adriana Urasmuni and I were talking about other ways. This is sort of the way that best fits when you observe the long run outcome. There are ways to do it if you don't observe the long run outcome that would differ and use different assumptions. But in this case, we actually observe the long run outcome. So I'm going to keep in mind that negative 5% that we're getting from the RCT. So here you can see the estimates when you combine the experimental and observational data for log wages first. So we carried around that negative 5%, but it's getting relatively little weight. So you can see the weights here, it's only getting about 21% of the weight. The other 80% of the weight is coming from the observational estimate. So we're going to settle at this point estimate for the wage effect of about 15% increase in wages for the youth. We do the same for college. The college estimates are a little bit more similar between the RCT and the observational design. If anything, we're going to end up having to downweight the RCT a little bit. We're going to have to lower the RCT point estimate by similar weights because the observational estimate came out lower. So we're saying there's somewhere about around a 7 or 8 percentage point increase in college attendance across the 2 research designs. Drink for water. So I want to tell you about how to think about the different results in the context of a model that can help us relate the magnitudes to each other. I think that the program design and also survey evidence from the RCT are really ruling out some of these channels that you might think of in a lot of interventions targeting youth, like increasing the budget set. There's not a cash transfer component. It's not increasing human capital. At least the parents don't report that they think that it's increasing human capital, and that's not how the program is designed. And it's not really a pure information treatment, although there are ways that information would be exchanged here. But I want to sort of highlight the way to think about this mechanism using an identity formation model following Akerlof and Crandon 2000, where youth differ in their socioeconomic status of the people that they interact with. And when the youth is randomly assigned to interact with a mentor, this is a shock to the SES of the people that the youth is coming into contact with, which in turn is going to influence their decision-making by a utility function. So I'm not going to run any new analysis. I'm just going to be helping us interpret the magnitudes by rescaling all their outcomes by their correlation with parent income to intuitively answer the question, by how much did the social intervention eliminate the intergenerational persistence of different outcomes? Let me walk you through what I mean by that a little bit more graphically. So here's the distribution of parents' income. I've ranked them according to the national distribution of parent income. You can see on average, they're on the low end. I think we saw that the mean income was on the around $28,000 for parents. In contrast, the mentor's income is much higher. I think we saw their mean was about $90,000. If you think about where the mentors would be falling in the income distribution relative to parents, they're coming from about 30 percentiles higher than the youth's parents. And then I promise this is the last graph I'll overlay on the same axes. We think about these intergenerational gradients that have been observed a lot in recent literature. So here I have from Chetty et al. 2014, the famous relationship between kids' income rank and parents' income rank, it's upward sloping. And I want to understand how much of the upward slope in this particular gradient for income, for instance, could be due to the social exposure channel of mentoring. So in principle, what we're doing is we're comparing the median mentor is about 30 percentage points higher in the parent income distribution than the median parent. So we're going to think about when we shock exposure by 30 bins of parent income, by how much is that going to help the kid climb that parent income ladder, sort of moving the vertical distance on that gradient. Yeah.
You know, what is parents' education like compared to kids, the mentors? So how do I know this is income and not those ones?
So I know that many of the parents are not highly educated, and many of the mentors would have advanced degrees. I think, you know, education is surely, you know, part of what's going on behind this gradient. And I mean, for what it's worth, education is also something that we're seeing move.
Right.
So the outcomes are certainly related to each other. There's a lot of endogeneity here. But I want to try to help us think about, are they climbing the income ladder and income at the same amount that they're climbing the income ladder on the college gradient, for instance? So that's what this is going to help us do. So yeah, Clemence.
Yeah, just to test a bit the approach, do you see that the treatment effects are larger, the larger the gradient?
Between the actual youth and the mentor, you mean?
Yeah.
So I don't have data on the mentors from the RCT, unfortunately, so I'm not able to use that data. I've done some playing around in the Boston data where you can see I have both the youth and the mentors linked to the tax data. I have to warn you, it's not randomized, right? It's not random what mentor you get. I think that there have been some indications that the higher income is the mentor, the higher income the youth ends up having, which is sort of maybe going in the direction that you might have expected, but I really, you know, caution against overinterpreting.
You know, to have some.
Yeah, it's
like,
context.
see
Absolutely.
this relationship.
Yeah. Right. So to put these magnitudes in perspective now, we think about, for instance, that's that long run behavioral index that we saw something like a 0.22% increase in. You know, it turns out that behavioral index is very correlated with parent income. So this is its relationship within the sample. And then if we think about that increase between the treatment and control, that's equivalent to moving up about 20 bins, 20 percentiles in that parent income distribution. So we're going to say that that's closing the parent income gap by 20 bins. Bottom line, if we combine the point estimates across both the RCT and the observational designs, we find roughly consistent about 20 bins on either the behavioral index or pretty much any of the behavioral outcomes, though it's less precise and there's a wide confidence interval. We find something a little bit smaller on the economic outcomes, but not necessarily significantly smaller, but we're looking at about a 16 bin, increase on the economic outcomes. For context, we think of the mentor as shocking income by something like 30 percentage points relative to the parents. So if you want to think of this in a model of intergenerational mobility, it's suggesting somewhere on the order of roughly 1/2 to 2/3 of the overall intergenerational persistence of these outcomes that we see might be due to social exposure and can be alleviated by the social intervention of mentoring. Of course, the rest of it is you know, it could be schools, school quality, things like that are not being varied here. I want to wrap up by saying a little bit on costs and benefits, and then I want to tell you a little bit also about my other research in the remaining time. The program, there's a sort of a wide range of costs of the program. It does seem like there's sort of high fixed costs to starting it up, and then in agencies that have more matches, the variable cost can be a little bit lower. On average, it seems like the variable cost is something like $2,000 per match. Given the income gains of the youth, you can very easily see how this is a program that can sort of quote unquote pay for itself in some sense. I will say, so a question came up the last time I was here about how much the mentors are paid. The mentors are paid $0. If you were to pay them, you'd be for their time at their wage rate or extrapolating wage from their income. You'd think it's about $10,000 you're getting for free from each mentor. So that's not chump change. They don't pay mentors. I don't think they would, but that's a way that you might think about valuing the mentors' time. So there's a large literature on other mentoring interventions. So I mentioned there's this Baloo and You program that's being evaluated in Germany. Super exciting. I love that so they find that it's increasing kids' prosocial behaviors and schooling decisions. It's not something that we can necessarily relate to on magnitudes, but it's a similar cost. There's other mentoring programs out there that have been more expensive and that had worse outcomes. So I just want to highlight that. I want to sort of wrap up the findings here. Mentors seem to have an important implication for kids' later labor market trajectories. So we saw that first in the RCT, where we linked tax data and showed large impacts on social and behavioral choices, in particular college going, on the order of 10 percentage points. Then we introduced an observational research design in a program of administrative data set, which allowed us to conclude that there's positive income effects as well, which you might have expected based on the positive social outcomes. The magnitudes of the effects are extremely large, so they can account for much of the persistence in intergenerational inequality that we see in the real world. And this has policy implications because not all kids have access to natural mentors. And it means that programs that will help create and support natural mentoring relationships can and do help equalize kids' outcomes in adulthood. So that was it on mentors that I wanted to share with you. I also wanted to step back, if there are not questions on that, to say a little bit more about my broader research agenda, especially some of the research that's going on here at CPL and in CCPR. Yeah.
So I want to hear about that, and so maybe you want to postpone my question, but I'm still trying to get my head around the fact that the kids in the program chose to be in the program.
Yeah, like would it extrapolate to kids that didn't want to be in the program?
Right.
No, I think that's a fair question. I think it's hard to, so there's a recent literature, I think I mentioned a little bit on natural mentors, which I think I would lean on a little bit here. So I think Matthew Kraft at Brown and his co-authors may be familiar with it. So it's actually kind of remarkable. So they look in a data set where they can see just sort of self-reported, do you have a natural mentor, as in like a coach or a teacher who you view as a mentor? And through a variety of, not quite causal research designs, they're finding about a 10 percentage point increase in college attendance if you have a natural mentor, which is basically the same point estimate that I'm finding. They do find that the effects are bigger for lower income youth. So, and I only have a pool of lower income youth. So, I mean, I think intuitively you might expect this to extrapolate better to lower income youth who don't sort of have natural access to mentors in their house. But so I think that helps a little bit in terms of extrapolating.
I don't know, a natural mentor could be because of the relationship between the two, which is
It's different. Yeah, it's not the same, it's different. I think in some sense, it's very exciting that we can see when you introduce this, I don't want to say an artificial mentor, but if you artificially create a mentoring relationship, you can get the same benefits that seem to be accruing sort of naturally. But I think it's not always the easiest to say, how is this going to extrapolate to populations that they haven't worked with yet? I think that that's an open ground for future research. The other open ground for future research in terms of scalability is like, how do we get more mentors, right? So, I mentioned the mentors aren't paid. If you were to pay them, you would pay them about $10,000 for their time. So I don't think that that's necessarily, a good option. But one sort of way that I want to continue this research is also by looking at the effects on the mentors. So we have a data set of about, I think, 14,000 mentors that applied, and only half of them ended up getting matched to youth. There are a lot of reasons that they don't get matched. They don't show up to the interviews and stuff like that. And, that might not be the great quasi-experimental variation that you're looking for. But I think that there are fruitful grounds for understanding the effects on the mentors here. That's a project I'd be very excited to start after this one. Yes.
On the matching, they had to have a prior about who are the kids who are going to benefit the most.
Yeah.
When they match come from low income, single parent family.
Yeah.
Do you have a way to get back to that and separate
for sure. Yeah.
data into two sets and see if they're right in this assumption that these are the kids who benefit the most?
I tried to stick to heterogeneity that was pre-specified in the RCT, which is by gender and by race. I think you bring up an important, useful source of heterogeneity, which was also a question I had about, they think that single parent is a big deal here. So do you see bigger effects in single parent households? I don't include that in the paper, but I did run the specifications, and I didn't detect any significant difference really across the board in single parent status. My sense is it's probably just still too small of a sample, even when you cut by single parent status. But I think that's a great question. It's a question that the agency really wants to know also. How do they increase their impact? There could be potential also to look at some of the, I didn't include the slides here, but some of the match lengths. So you get a little bit more precise results if you sort of look at outcomes by match length, and there could be more to sort of dig into there in terms of heterogeneity too. Okay, yeah.
So the college going effect seems just large to me, based on everything, other RCTs.
They're really big. They're huge. They're really.
Really-
It's not as cheap as filling out someone's FAFSA, which has roughly the same.
So just trying to think of, so in trying to think about that, one thing that would be nice to know more about is what's happening to the control group in this time period. So there is some sort of change in some of these effects going down over time. So with the control condition at that point, like if I apply to this thing, I don't get it, maybe I'm getting less support than I would in this day and age. From others, right? So part of maybe what you're saying would be, it's nice to have these long-term outcomes. So these kids have to be, from higher groups in order to get to follow them, but it could be the control group thing. I'm also wondering about the age of the kids. So if you match these kids when they're littler, which is when they're getting middle school-ish, some of the college going are happening later. Maybe this is a nice development. Anyway, just
So the matches are a bit younger. Very few of the matches tend to persist into high school, is what I've heard from the agency. The reason being it's sort of fun and cool to have a big brother when you're small, and when you're in high school, that's not necessarily the coolest thing. And I think, especially when we talk about college as the outcome, I think a lot of people do wonder if that's literally just the effect of being in touch with the mentor. From the data, it doesn't really look like that, because most of these matches aren't technically lasting until college going. It's not to say that there isn't some contact, but most of the matches are really done by high school. Yeah. So I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about the rest of my research agenda. It's just one slide, but if you'll indulge me. I'm an applied economist focusing on labor inequality, and I have a particular interest actually in the intersection of inequality with innovation. So that's also where this paper fits in today. It's sort of my agenda on income inequality and also innovation. So I have a couple of papers using the tax data linked with patent data. First, looking at productivity spillovers across inventors, using a random death as an instrument for a loss in a co-inventor network. Also, the sort of most direct impetus for today's research is my Lost Einstein line of research. Also in the US tax data, where we're finding that exposure to inventors really matters in terms of career choice and forming the next generation of inventors. There's a lot of the sense that you can't be what you can't see there. So in particular for young girls, growing up around a lot of female adult inventors seems to be highly correlated with young girls becoming an inventor themselves. And that was a lot of the impetus for really trying to isolate the effect of mentors in that black box today. I have another sort of line of research that's putting forward methods for studying income inequality. These are some papers that I have in SSRN if you'd like to check them out. So I have a paper looking at both job amenities as well as now a new extension on valuing geographic amenities that I'm excited we just posted on SSRN. And then finally, the sort of last two buckets here are mostly directly related to CPL, which a lot of you probably know a lot about. So I've done a lot of policy writing, especially in early COVID. We've put out 16 CPL policy reports on UI and the labor market in California during the pandemic. They've been cited broadly in California, also picked up by the New York Times, cited in GAO, government accountability reports. We also have a lot of work on UI access, including a report to the Department of Labor and some other journal publications. And then the last bucket I want to hit on is some other research that is much more preliminary in the social safety net. So we do have a paper that's forthcoming now on UI expansion during the pandemic and its effects on labor supply coming out from CPL. We're also starting a new project on the effects of UI generosity on innovation. That's through a linkage of the patent data with the EDD UI claims data. And that's a project I'm very excited about as well. And then the final project is one that CCPR has done a good bit to support. I know Matt left, but I was going to give him a big shout out because Matt's done a lot to support that on student loan policy and innovation. And that's leveraging a large scale merge between the UCCP, the credit panel, and patent records to look at how differences in student loan debt affect innovation outcomes. So that's all I have for today. I think I'm a little bit short, but I'm happy to stay and talk more as time allows. Again, thanks.